Hey, Grover Norquist here. I'm president of Americans for Tax Reform, and this is the Leave Us Alone podcast. I want to talk today about the Taxpayer Protection Pledge. It's gotten a lot of attention over the years. It was started back in 1986 when President Reagan asked me to run Americans for Tax Reform, which was going to be the outside group, the outside lobby for what became the Taxpayer Act of 1986, Tax Reform Act of 1986. Remember, there was the big tax cut passed in 1981. Didn't really take effect until January 1983 because it was phased in. It was a 5% tax cut, a 10% tax cut, and a 10% tax cut, 25% rate increase, very similar to the tax cut that was done by Coolidge in the 1920s and gave us the Roaring '20s. And by Democrat John F. Kennedy, also about 25% rate reduction in the 1960s, which gave us the great growth in 1960s until Nixon started raising taxes and Lyndon Baines Johnson started raising spending. But Ronald Reagan did it. You saw tremendous growth, 4 million jobs created in 1983 alone, the first year of the tax cut. So Then we said, you know what we need to do next? And even the Democrats agreed. When we took the rates down, it was tremendously helpful to growth. And the Democrats saw that. And the Republicans had a majority in the Senate. Democrats had a majority in the House. They got together and they took the rate. The top rate was 50 and it came down, it was down to 34. And it was brought down to 1927, 28. So there are two rates, one at 15, one 27, 28. And those were the two rates in taxes. And what happened was they passed a revenue-neutral bill, got rid of a lot of deductions and credits, some of them worthy, some of them not so worthy, but in order to get the rates down. And that gave us growth as well and was helpful. I was part of the campaign to get marginal tax rates down in 86. Started in 85, it's a 2-year campaign. And as we got close to the end, what are we going to do? There were a lot of conservatives who are worried, wait, if we take rates way down low, get rid of a lot of deductions and credits, how much easier would it be to take the rate up 1 point and get a bunch of money? So then the Democrats could say, oh, it's only up 1, it's only up 2. But if you do that often enough, you're back up to where you were without the protection of the deductions and the credits at a higher and higher rate. How can we protect that tax rate from drifting up? And that was the Taxpayer Protection Pledge. It is something that I put together. I sent it out to about 5 different leaders in the Republican Party, Gingrich and others. Nobody responded. Everyone was busy. But I walked through and I said, what do you like, the wording and everything? Didn't really get a response, so I put it out, shared it. 100 congressmen signed the pledge. Basically, we're not raising taxes. Signed it, 2 witnesses, dated a contract with the American people about not raising your taxes. And then you had the situation a decade before the contract with America that Gingrich later did. And then you had 20 in the Senate. So 20 senators, 100 congressmen, almost all Republicans. We actually early on got 2 Democrats, the Democrat from Alabama and one from Colorado, and then 5 Democrat congressmen, one from Georgia, the rest from Texas. Later, they all became Republicans. Give you some idea of the difference between the 2 parties. But for a while, we had some Democrats who signed the pledge. And this helped enact the Tax Reform Act of 1986. But then it was used by candidates in the 1986 election. People who took the pledge, I thought it was something kind of an inside the Beltway thing where you tell everybody, I've made this pledge. Don't ever ask me to raise taxes. I took a pledge. People went and campaigned on it and said, vote for me. I've signed the pledge. And then candidates started taking it, not just incumbents. Candidates did. And by 1988, 2 years after the bill passed, there was a fight between the vice president, Bush, and Bob Dole, senator from Kansas. Bob Dole was not really a supply sider. He's from Kansas, where the Republican Party was the tax increasing party. As crazy as that sounds, they were. They were the incumbents. It was their government. They raised taxes too much. And Dole didn't really understand what Reagan was talking about with the lower taxes and the growth, but he was a good Republican, so he followed along and helped vote for the bills. But he refused to sign the pledge not to raise taxes, and he was winning. And we went into New Hampshire. And during the debate, just before the New Hampshire primary, you had a number of Republicans, Pete DuPont, former governor of Delaware. You had George W. Bush, the vice president. And Pete DuPont handed the pledge on television during this debate to Bob Dole, and Bob Dole reacted like a vampire had somebody just tossed a cross in his lap. He's, oh, no, bad luck. Bad luck when you're running in New Hampshire, which doesn't have an income tax, prides itself on lower taxes. Bob Dole lost in New Hampshire and then everywhere. And Bush, running as the candidate, one of the candidates who took the pledge, won the primary. And then he was 13 points behind Mike Dukakis. Okay, if you can imagine that, you may not even remember who Mike Dukakis was. Many of us during the campaign didn't really remember who he was. He was from Massachusetts, very liberal, very left-wing. And I knew him because before I emigrated to the United States, I used to live in Massachusetts, so I knew who Dukakis was. Anyway, he ran against Dukakis, says, I'm never going to raise taxes, and he gave that very famous speech. The Democrats will come and ask me to raise taxes. I will say no. The Democrats will come and ask me again, and I will say no again. And the Democrats will come and ask me to raise taxes, and I will say, read my lips, no new taxes. And he won. He beat Dukakis. Came from behind once he started being the no tax increase candidate. And Dukakis, as a Democrat, was a tax anything that moves candidate. He wins. But then 2 years in, he agrees to a tax increase. A guy named Darman was his brilliant, very smart advisor who told him it'd be okay. No one would notice. And what happened was George Herbert Walker Bush, father of George W. Bush, later president also, he had won the Cold War. Soviet Union fell apart. And he did so without a lot of blood on the floor. He had kicked Iraq out of Kuwait and didn't stick around to run the place. He was a fairly successful president, except for one thing, tax increase and spending increase. That tax increase paid for a spending increase, not for something else. Tax increase, spending increase. He agreed to it. Boom. He lost to a nobody from Arkansas. Arkansas wasn't even technically a state at the time. But Clinton beat him. So what did Republicans and Democrats do? In 1994, after 2 years of Clinton, who wanted to raise taxes and did, and tried to raise spending and didn't have as much luck on that as he wanted to, the Republicans swept the House and Senate. One of the reasons, and you can see it on this chart, from 1932, Franklin Delano Roosevelt becomes president, to the yellow line, 1994, okay? 62 years. The Republicans won both houses of Congress, once under Truman, once under Eisenhower. 1 out of every 15 years. 4 years out of 62 years. You saw up here's who ran the Senate, Democrats, down here, the House, Democrats. The Republicans did have, under Reagan, 6 years of Senate control. That was good. But the Democrats always had a veto over anything they wanted in the House of Representatives. 62 years, basically uninterrupted Democrat control of Congress. Congress makes all the decisions. Only Congress raises taxes, cuts taxes, spends money, stops spending money, okays Supreme Court justices, declares war, all those things. Congress, not president. In 1994, 96% of Republican candidates, House and Senate, signed the pledge. The Republican Party became the party that would never raise your taxes. And they haven't raised taxes since. They haven't voted for tax increases. What's here? Now we have, since 1994, Republican dominance in the House and the Senate. Before, nothing. Now, 18 years of Republican control of both houses. 18 years, Republicans won both houses. 6 years, the Democrats won control of both houses. And 6, it was split. But this is what it means to be the party that will not raise your taxes. And the pledge has made it easy for people to remember, now who will raise my taxes and who won't? And so a lot of Democrats and in the old days, Republicans would go, I think I don't want to raise taxes. Didn't say they wouldn't, just say they don't want to. The last thing I'd want to do is raise taxes. That doesn't mean no. It just means last. Now is not the time to raise taxes. Count 1, 2, 3. Now's the time to raise taxes. Verbal promises not to raise taxes always come with a exception, with a maybe, with a exit strategy. But a written pledge, I will never raise your taxes. I will never vote to raise your taxes. You can't promise the taxes won't be raised if you're in the minority. You're not promising that a Democratic Congress couldn't pass a bill while you were a Republican going no. But the promise is, I won't vote for a tax increase, period. I can control my vote. And so you can trust a politician who tells you that because they're not promising you something outside their ability to deliver. So that is how the pledge became terribly important. We stopped massive tax increases that the Democrats wanted under Obama. 60 Minutes invited me on to talk about it because they were quite sure the Republicans were going to fold. So they're going to do a profile on me and the pledge, the Taxpayer Protection Pledge, which was going to fall apart in October. And so we did all the pictures and the filming and so on. And it was clearer and clear the Republicans were not folding. And Obama didn't understand. They was convinced Republicans would fold, but they didn't. And they held. And we stopped the tax increases that Obama wanted. And we actually got significant spending restraint that Obama didn't want. So the pledge really did what it was supposed to do at that point. And that was a very, very important win. And as a result, we've now worked in all 57 states, I'm assured that it's 57, to try and get taxes down as much as possible. And we've got 2/3 of the Republican governors have signed a pledge never to raise taxes. And that's really helped, as you've probably seen this wonderful chart. 50 states. Green states, no income tax, no state income tax. Yellow states, single rate, flat rate income tax. Very difficult to raise because you have to raise everybody's taxes at once. Very easy, very difficult to raise, easy to cut. Why? Because when you say we're going to go from 4 to 3, everybody listening to you goes, my taxes are going down. Good. If I say I'm going 3 to 4, everybody in the room goes, my taxes, all our taxes are going up. No. So flat rate, very important to have. And you'll actually see the black dots here are those where, these are all in Republican red states, where the Republican governor and the House and Senate have said, we are going to zero. And they've taken serious steps to do so. That's 12 states en route to zero. So, and the pledge helps protect that. Governors take the pledge. It makes it easy to veto things. You say, I told you, I'm voting no. This is an extremely helpful thing. I used to hear criticism of people who say, well, the pledge not to raise taxes isn't good enough because you have to do spending too. Well, I'll tell you why I just did taxes. Why do we just have the pledge on it? If you ask for too many things, the pledge becomes too complicated. People can't remember it. And the politicians can talk around it. So I wanted it just on taxes. The other one is taxes either get raised or not on Tuesday. Spending happens in one committee and then another committee, and then the House passes one bill and the Senate passes a different bill. And then they go into the middle and they fiddle with it. It comes back in the middle. They've all touched it so many times. And anyone could say, well, I voted no at this point, but that didn't stop it. So it's tougher to come up, and I'm open to people's ideas on how you have a spending limit on Congress. If you had 60 votes in the Senate and a majority in the House and a president, you could cobble together some laws that would do that. I don't see how you do it through a pledge, but because of too many moving parts. But I'm not against the idea. It's just why, when you ask why taxes, some people used to argue, oh, people who want to keep taxes down, this is a starve the beast idea, that if you starve the beast, if you don't give the government more money, it will discipline itself. Well, sometimes. But what I would point to, it's possible at the federal level to run a deficit. So somebody could say, well, you don't raise taxes, but you keep the left putting more spending in there. That could someday force a tax increase or create inflation, as under Biden. But I want to point to the fact that lower taxes does lead to lower spending. New York, the gray one up there, graduated income tax. New York has fewer people than Florida. Now, when I was a kid, Florida was full of cows and I had a grandfather who had cows on his land. Now it's all skyscrapers. But Florida has more people in it now because people move from high tax states to low tax states, oddly enough. And so New York has fewer people. Florida has more. Florida spends, this is like last year's number, $115 billion in state spending, $115 billion. New York, with fewer people, spends twice as much, $230 billion. So they spend more than twice as much per person in New York than Florida. Now, they both have schools, they both have roads. New York they pay the bureaucrats more. The bureaucrats work fewer hours in a day, fewer days in a month, fewer months in a year, fewer years in their working life. They have pensions like you'll never see and benefits like you'll never see. So they really bulk up on paying government bureaucrats and handing out money to people to vote for the governor. Florida, because they didn't have an income tax, never raised a bunch of money and felt that we got all this money, what do we do with it? And then decided to go crazy and spend money in ways that are not constructive. So by not having an income tax in Texas and Florida and Tennessee, that's kept their spending down. And now we're seeing more and more states, the black states, are phasing their income taxes down to zero. And they do it simply by limiting spending and cutting the income tax, because whenever you limit spending, you don't need as much money. The income tax can come down a little bit, and a little, and a little, and a little. And over time, you get to zero. There are 5 states committed to get to zero now. Governor and everybody's passed a law to do that. And there are 12 where people have said, we are going to make this happen. And you can see them actually working at that to make that happen. So the Taxpayer Protection Pledge puts a line in the sand, makes it difficult to raise taxes, makes it easy for someone to say, I'd love to help you. That's such a wonderful idea. I just think that it would be a great idea, but I'm not raising taxes to do it. So you're going to have to reduce spending somewhere else. By not having high taxes and making it impossible to raise taxes, whenever somebody says, I've got a great idea, say, fine, cut spending somewhere else. And then we'll do your idea. If your idea is better than things we're doing now, you could replace something we're doing now. But if your position is, no, mine's a great idea, but we should only do it if I can raise taxes, what you're saying is, this is the least good, the worst idea of everything the government's doing. It's last in line. You'd never do it unless everything else was fully funded first and you had more money. That's not an argument that it's a good idea. That's an argument that's a very bad idea. There's nothing you'd give up in order to have it. Oh, but you want the taxpayers to give up their money in order to have it. Well, you lose, because that's crazy. And that's not something that people are willing to put up with. So the Taxpayer Protection Pledge has changed American politics. not just on taxes, but because when the Republicans win 18 years control of House and Senate, and Democrats only 6, that's Supreme Court judges, that's other judges, that's laws on spending, that's laws on regulations, that's all the various commissions that people fill. Huge, huge victory. And this has changed the direction of the country and has allowed us to make some real progress. Thank you so very much. Taxpayer Protection Pledge.